Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so we will get started. First off, with a health and safety announcement. There's no fire alarm drill anticipated today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you are told it is safe to return. And please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. To start the meeting then, good morning everyone and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Wednesday the 11th of September 2024. I'm your Chair, Councillor Todd Olive. To my right is Vice Chair, Councillor Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management, Keith Lane, Senior Planning Policy Officer, Damien Hunter, our planning solicitor, Wendy Harris, Democratic Services Officer, and for some reason banished from the top table today, James Coles, Planning Policy Officer. Can I remind everyone that this meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website, so please can members and officers making a contribution to the meeting use a microphone or your comments will not be recorded. And for the benefit of the public, worth mentioning, this is the second time with our new microphone system, so if any members have a little bit of difficulty, please do bear with us. It's a little bit different. We'll now start the meeting then by doing a roll call of committee members, please. Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor Olive.
Present.
And do you have any declarations for this meeting?
I don't know.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Howell.
Present.
And do you have any declarations?
No declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Jess Bailey. Do you have any declarations, Jess?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Present, and I have no declarations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Colin Brown.
Present and no.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Sorry, Wendy, it's taking this time firing up. Oh no, I'm on. Thank you. Yes, present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Present and affects NRI in respect of agenda item 7A, Seaton allocations. I have family members who live nearby to sites Seaton 02 and Seaton 13A, but they'll be unlikely to be affected any more than any other member of the public.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Present and affects ORI. I live opposite seat 02, so for that I won't comment on that particular site and I'll leave the room.
So that's an affects ORI, did you say? Thank you.
Sorry, could I just interject there? Is that an effects and prejudicial or just an effects? Yes, so and prejudicial, yeah. Lovely, thank you.
Councillor Levine.
Present, no declaration.
Thank you. Councillor Parr.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. So I'll just move on to the non-committee members that I can see here. So Councillor Goodman, do you have any declarations? Oh, so you don't have any? No, thank you. Councillor Burrup? No declarations, thank you. Councillor Arnott?
Not for this session.
Okay. So the afternoon session?
As a parish councillor for Thomas.
Okay. Councillor Exon? No declarations, thank you. Councillor Barlow?
Just a member of Sidmouth Town Council.
Member of Sidmouth Town Council. Who else have we got? Councillor Collins, do you have any declarations?
No, I never had any directly.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. And possibly worth mentioning, just for the benefit of the tape and the public, that I think all members of committee have received quite extensive lobbying emails in respect of some of the sites being considered today, and I will say no more then. That brings us then to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Wendy.
Yes, we've got Councillor Brian Bailey, Councillor Bethany Collins, Councillor Paula Fernley and Councillor Jeff Young.
Brilliant, thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest, we have done. Agenda item 3, public speaking. I have nobody registered to speak in this slot.
No.
Okay. Agenda item 4, matters of urgency, there are none. Agenda item 5, any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded. Again, there are none. Which brings us then to the moment you've all been waiting for, agenda item 6, proposed housing site allocations at Sidmouth, Sidbury and Newton Poppleford. Mr. Freeman. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be helpful if, when we go through these, before we start each report, we're told what the aspired figure is for us to achieve, because rather than guessing at a figure that we're trying to achieve, we actually have some kind of methodology in achieving the numbers that we're looking for.
I'll let Mr. Freeman come back on that point specifically, but I don't believe we have numbers specifically broken down as a target for each area. There's the overall target, which members will be aware we're about 1,800 homes short on, but I'll let Mr. Freeman respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members will recall at the last meeting I presented a report on local plan housing requirements, which is the overall housing requirement figure, which is 20,812 dwellings across the plan period. And we reported that we were seeking to achieve a 10% headroom on that, which would obviously be a total of 1,828 dwellings, but we currently have a headroom of only 253 dwellings, or 1.2%. So we are currently, based on officers' allocations, quite significantly short of where we're trying to get to. We've been keeping track, so we've been keeping a running total based on the resolutions of the previous meeting, and I think we're slightly up on where we were based on the recommendations to the last meeting, up by 149 homes compared to where we expected to be at the end of the last meeting. But obviously, there are, as the Chair says, there are no targets for specific settlements. It's about trying to bring forward as many sites through this process as we can, starting from a position where the officer's recommendations would already leave you short of where we need to get to. The other point I'd make at this point, I suppose, is that I think there was some reluctance at the previous meeting to consider sites in sensitive locations like green wedges and coastal preservation areas in particular, but they do make up a not insignificant proportion of the allocations. I think between those two allocations, we have over 1,800 homes in officers' recommendations proposed for allocation in those areas. And then obviously there's the national landscape issue as well. So we do need to be mindful of, while those designations might be seen as reasons to reject sites, we are not going to meet our housing target unless we accept that we are going to have to allocate in some of those sensitive locations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there anything else to say to introduce the report?
It's Keith.
Oh, it's Keith. Okay, well, very briefly then, before we come to Keith. I just had a few words I wanted to say about infrastructure, because I know many of you from the public will be here today to talk about infrastructure. We know we have problems throughout the district. We know we have problems with sewage, with dentists, with GPs, with schools, and the list could go on. Those, unfortunately, aren't problems that we can solve today, nor are they in law reasons that we can give not to allocate. As far as planning law is concerned, there are other mechanisms by which capacities in infrastructure should be dealt with. They're not a reason for us not to allocate sites. They are a reason to phase development, to delay development until infrastructure comes forward, and we have tools that we can use to do that. But they're not a reason that we can give to simply not allocate anything. That being said, there are obviously concerns that we share. Everyone here in committee is a resident of East Devon too. We have the same problems that you all will no doubt be making reference to. With that said, then, Mr. Lane.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'll just touch on the first couple of slides, which you had last time as well, actually, so I won't spend too long on them, about the site selection methodology. So there's a 4-stage process that we went through in terms of identifying the sites from a very long list initially, sifting through that long list to come up with reasonable sites, which were free of any sort of major constraints. And stage 3 was assessing all of those sites in more detail. And finally, stage 4, making a recommendation as to whether to select the sites for allocation or not. A bit more on the stage 4, so that final decision on allocating the site. So there's a question in the middle, is basically yes or no, do we allocate the site or not? And from that, we've got sort of 2, I suppose, top-down issues to consider: the overall housing and employment requirement that we've sort of touched on already, the spatial strategy and the emerging local plan, which tries to direct development to the most sustainable locations in the district. And then the more detailed site assessment work for each of the individual sites. Lots of detail that we'll go through today, I'm sure. And you factor those in, and then it's basically a yes or no, do we want to allocate the site or not? So we'll start with Sidmouth. So in the emerging local plan, Sidmouth is a main centre, so sort of second tier in the settlement hierarchy, just below Exmouth. So it's got a good level of services and facilities and jobs. So the theory being that we want to allocate a fairly significant amount of development there. So I'm sure most people are aware of the constraints around Sidmouth. You've got the sea to the south, national landscape around the other 3 sort of areas of the town. So it's a very constrained settlement. So the first site is Sidmouth 17, quite a small site to the southwest of the town. 8 dwellings is proposed, was factored in, but the actual recommendation is not to allocate this site.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. We come first then to Councillor Lockyer from Sidmouth Town Council. If you hit the button on the right, your 3 minutes will start.
Right, okay. My statement is actually about all of the sites in Sidmouth, so I hope you'll excuse that. So, yes, good morning. My name is Chris Lockyer. I'm Chair of Sidmouth Town Council, and I am speaking to you today in that capacity. Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers and councillors for their hard work in putting together this local plan. We fully understand the difficulty in doing this. I'd like to comment on the sites in the Sid Valley recommended for additional housing or employment, and I'll start with Sidmouth 29. We strongly object to this being adopted as a site for employment for 3 main reasons. The site immediately to the south of this has already been designed as employment land, but has not been built out, so there's clearly no need in Sidford for more employment land. Secondly, we remain concerned about the building on the green wedge between Sidford and Sidbury. And finally, the A375 Two Bridges Road is unsuitable for heavy traffic. Sidmouth 6A, we strongly object to this being used for housing, as it would involve building on the green wedge between Sidbury and Sidford. And maintaining the separation of these settlements is a clear policy in the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan. This would also involve building on national landscape land and set a precedent for further development on the adjoining land. The area is also prone to flooding, making the land unsuitable. Sidmouth 31, we remain concerned about this proposal as it involves building on the national landscape land, but we do acknowledge the difficulty of finding enough sites in the area, given that we are surrounded by national landscape. We therefore conclude the net benefit to the community will be positive, and so we support the allocation of this site. We would, however, wish that the allocation of housing to this site, or indeed any other site in Sidmouth, should be in line with the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan housing policies 12 and 13, which require a proportion of the houses to be affordable and or social housing, and that priority be given to people with local connections and not become second homes. Sidmouth 32A, we support the adoption of this site, but once again, as long as neighbourhood plan policies 12 and 13 are enforced, and subject to the inclusion of a park and change site on this land, which has long been mooted, and which would offer sustainable transport options for the community and help reduce traffic congestion. Sidmouth 34A, this is in Sidbury, and we object to the use of this site, as it again is within the National Landscape Land, and also impinges on the gap between Sidford and Sidbury. The site would have a dangerous access given the narrowness of the A375 at this point. In addition, Sidbury Primary School is full, which I appreciate you just mentioned is not a reason for rejecting outright, and the site affects the setting of the Furshill Farm, a listed building.
That is
So
your
thank you
3 minutes.
for your attention.
Thank you, Councillor Lockyer. Well timed. Could you just turn the microphone off, please? Thank you. And just to check, will you be wanting to speak on the other sites you've registered, or does that cover it? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. We have next up then, it says on my sheet, Councillor Barlone, but Councillor Barlow, if you'd like to step up to the mic.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to just say what Sidmouth said is basically what I want to say, but I'm not allowed to say because I'm only allowed to speak on this one. We're all NIMBYs, with the exception of our leader, who always assures me he's not. But we do understand Sidmouth needs some houses, but we need the right sort of houses. And all I would, and I know you're going to say you probably can't do this, all I would say to you is, if you're giving us houses, please, 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 can we have more affordable houses, more houses for the people that we need in Sidmouth. We don't need employment land because at the end of the day, 51% of our population is over retirement age, 65% is economically inactive. We need people that can look after the people we've got already and serve our community. So please, can you just make sure we get the right houses as 12 and 13 say? We don't need any more employment land. It doesn't matter where you think you're putting it. You put 10 hectares in the last plan, your predecessors. None of it's been used. Now it's coming up for residential because we don't need employment land. So I've got nothing really to add other than what Sidmouth's already said, and I will leave it at that. I don't want to take your time. I do thank you for what you do. I know it must be a very difficult job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barlone. Okay, we come to committee then. I have no other speakers registered. Who would like to start us off today? Councillor Ingham.
Further to what Councillor Barlow was saying, I think he has got a point, and I'm not saying this particular site, but we have to be mindful of if you approve a site to achieve numbers, but we can't, or the developer comes back and says, oh, we can't provide 25% or 50% affordable housing, we can only provide 5 or 10%, then we have completely failed because we have identified a site that has no long-term benefit to the communities we're trying to support. I'll just point that. Thank you, Chair.
It's worth saying at that point that market housing of itself is a benefit to communities. I appreciate it. No, respectfully, Councillor Ingham, we need more housing. The evidence for that is well established. Absolutely correct that we do need more affordable housing, and in that respect we look to government to give us more power to actually resist efforts by developers to tone down their affordable housing provision on viability grounds, because our powers in that respect are limited by law through the viability mechanism. But having said that, are there any comments on site Sidmouth 17? Councillor Parr?
Yes, Chairman, this site is not recommended for allocation and I propose we move on.
Okay, we have a proposal to move on from Councillor Parr, seconded by Councillor Ingham. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the planning officer, just for a point of clarification, last week when we were considering Exmouth sites, there was a debate about the use of the coastal preservation area designation. Can I ask why this site, which appears as close to the coast as it possibly can be without being at the edge of a cliff, is not in a coastal preservation area? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sufficiently familiar with this site, but the methodology behind the coastal preservation is not so much about proximity to the coast as visibility. So it may be that this site is close to the coast, but not actually visually prominent from the coast and from views into the coast. So I would imagine, from my understanding of the methodology, that would be the reason in this case, which would be set out in the methodology. And there was a report, if you're interested, that was brought to the committee in March or April, I think, on the designation of the coastal preservation as the methodology behind that. But that would be the logic here, I think.
Okay, we have a proposal. Does anybody else wish to speak on this site? No. Okay, in which case then we have a proposal from Councillor Parr, seconded by Councillor Ingham, to move on. All those in favour? Okay, thank you very much, members. That was unanimous. It's worth mentioning, perhaps for the benefit of the public, the vote you've just seen is in effect a vote to reject. As we have to meet the numbers, or the plan is going to be dead on arrival at Regulation 19 stage. On the basis of legal advice, we're not using a wording to vote to explicitly reject today. That will come back to that at the end of the process once we have the numbers to formally reject them all, as we might have to revisit. Okay. In that case then, we come on to site Sidmouth 12. And the only registered speaker I have is Councillor Lockyer. So we come straight to committee then, members. Site is not recommended for allocation. Does anybody wish to speak? No, in which case I'll propose from the chair that we move on from this site then. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, if only we could get through them all this quickly. Site Sidmouth 13 then. I have, again, Councillor Lockyer, but then Mr. Richard Ely, the landowner.
Hello everyone, good morning. I previously explained to you why I'm disappointed that a much altered version of our submission has been placed before you by the officers. 83% of our proposal has been deleted without notifying me and without my consent. If nothing else, that's pretty rude. I have asked the officers why they have replaced our scheme with their own much inferior alternative, and I have been told that it was because our scheme was too complicated for members and the general public to understand. Helpfully, however, today's agenda correctly describes what we wanted to include, but have been forbidden to do so, which was a new bridge over the river, new paths and cycleways, a lake for migrating birds and allotments, plus public access to 25 acres, including 15 acres in the Bys, a big tree planting flood mitigation programme, and improved connectivity. So you now know what we wanted to do. Hopefully you can understand it. I find nothing in that list that either you or the wider public would not comprehend or indeed object to. We want to provide infrastructure, not forget about it, and we are offering affordables. Our submission was first accepted by the HELA team 3 years ago, then replaced unilaterally by the officer alternative. After we complained, our submission was reinstated and apologies received from the officer team for mistakenly deleting our scheme. Then, remarkably, a few weeks later, the officers put their proposal back in again, deleting ours for the second time. Needless to say, again, they didn't tell us. So Sidmouth 13 has had 4 iterations so far. The only consistent part is our original submission, which we have not changed at any time. They have even illustrated their scheme with 3 photos, 2 of which in fact show the land that they have deleted. You cannot help but see the funny side of it. It is quite a comedy of errors. Given all this, I cannot imagine how you can, with any seriousness, discuss this and vote. My suggestion is that Site 13 is put back a week, so no significant delay, and voted on at the next meeting. I further suggest that both my scheme and the officer scheme should be on the agenda so that the general public and this committee can finally see what we proposed and the options available. My only request is that our scheme is scored. Ours was the only submission to the HELA that was never assessed by the officers, for the simple reason that they replaced it with their own scheme, which incidentally scored badly before the assessment process began.
Thank you, Mr. Ely. That's 3 minutes.
Okay. I can really only leave it with you to do the right thing and ensure the correct evidence will finally be put before you. Thank you very much.
At that point, then, I'm going to come to Mr. Freeman, who I believe has some matters to bring to our attention on this site.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Perhaps we could switch to HDMI 2. So just to explain the rather complex history to this particular site and how it's been considered through the process. So this is a plan that was submitted with the site and shows the overall proposal that Mr. Ely has been referring to. So you'll see in a second, hopefully. So you'll see there are sort of 3 components to the site. There's the site labelled SIDM 13, which is the site with assessors officers, which shows the land proposed for houses and a hotel. To the south of that is a proposed 10 acres of land for residents of the development. It's just indicated as 2 fields, presumably for their access and amenity. And then opposite, there's proposed 15 acres of land for amenity, recreation and wildlife, which forms part of the Bays. And access into that area. Now, members will be aware that this process in terms of site allocations is fundamentally about housing sites and employment land. The potential amenity or recreational use of those areas, certainly in terms of the 10 acres for residents, I'm not sure that would even need planning permission, but certainly these wider areas are not things that would be necessary to make the development on SIDM 13 acceptable, and therefore not things that we could include within the process because they're not reasonably necessary for that purpose. So the site that has been considered fundamentally is, apologies, this one, SIDM 13 for 43 homes and a hotel. And that's the site that's before you today. We do appreciate that Mr. Ely is offering those wider benefits and areas of land as part of his proposal, but through the planning process we would not be able to secure them, and so we have not included them in our assessment. I hope that helps to clarify the position. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I have no further speakers registered on Sidmouth 13 then, so we come to committee. The recommendation is not to allocate. Councillor Ingham. Microphone, Councillor Ingham. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Because of the complexity of this site, I think it's nice that we have the opportunity to maybe revisit it at a later date. So at this time, I propose we move on.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Does anybody wish to second the proposal to move on? Councillor Parr, seconding. Do you wish to speak? Okay, thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case then we have a proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Parr, to move on. All those in favour? Councillor Bailey?
Can I just ask a question? When we say move on, does that mean we're going to revisit it, or?
Potentially, yes. Okay, we'll do the vote again then. We have the proposal to move on from Councillor Ingham. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, that brings us then to site Sidmouth 14. Again, not proposed for allocation. I have no further public speakers on this site. Does anybody on committee wish to speak? No, in which case I'll move from the chair that we move on. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Which brings us then to Sidmouth 29, and I have first up Mr. Philip Ragg representing the Sid Vale Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope this is working, which I can hear. That's great, thank you. To confirm, I'm one of the trustees, Sid Vale Association, with the Amenity Society for the Sid Valley, with over almost, I should say, 2,000 members. We congratulate the planning officers and the councillors for all their hard work and research producing these reports, which is much appreciated. In terms of the site 29, new employment land, next to, just to the west of the sewage works, we object to this. I think by way of background, others have commented on the fact that just to the south there is the Sid Ford Business Park, which received consent for warehousing in addition to being designated for employment land, and it's never been utilised, and effectively blighting land. The property is now available, it's being marketed as residential land. Secondly, there's no evidence base, which normally forms a key part of the local plan process. For the last local plan I was involved in and attended the invitation of the inspector, you produced two reports, the Roger Timms report and also the Atkins report, analysing the need for employment land. And there was no real need in an area of low unemployment for this use. So we're struggling to understand why, with no research papers, you're proposing this site. So to confirm, we object to this particular proposal due to there being no demand for employment land. We're going to lose valuable national landscape form of the AONB and the risk of the loss of the green wedge between Sidbury and Sid Ford. And that's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ragg. On that point then, I'm just going to come to Mr. Freeman. Sorry, Mr. Ragg, could you turn the microphone off, please? I'll just very briefly come to Mr. Freeman on the point of the employment evidence, and perhaps we could have clarification on whether the site is within a designated green wedge, either within the local plan or the neighbourhood plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on the need for employment land. So I think the speaker was referring to documents from the previous local plan. There is an up-to-date economic development needs assessment that identifies need for employment land across the district. In this local plan period, quite a substantial need, in this case of between about 80 and 120 hectares. I think depending on the scenarios you look at it, it doesn't look specifically at specific towns in the district, but obviously, as has been mentioned earlier in the meeting, Sidmouth is a substantial town in tier 2 of the settlement hierarchy, so it's anticipated that it will take a not insignificant proportion of housing and employment land needs. In this case, at this site and the adjoining sites that are allocated has been identified in the previous local plan. So it's not actually additional employment land, it's retaining an allocation that hasn't come forward during the plan period. I think this northern area was triggered and could come forward upon an element of completion of the larger site to the south. So I think there is an ongoing need for employment land in Sidmouth. I think some of the points have been raised about the ageing population rather indicate that as well, in terms of a need for jobs within the community for younger people, in the hope that they could stay within the community. So I'm satisfied that there is a need for employment land in the district. Whether or not the levels of employment land are commensurate with that is a more subjective judgment, given that the need assessment is district-wide. In terms of the green wedge, I think that the screen is indicating no, so I'm assuming it's not within the green wedge.
It's, well, at the moment, there is no local plan green wedge there. It's in the neighbourhood plan non-coalescence area. But looking at the map in the Sidmouth neighbourhood plan, that area is marked as an employment allocation and isn't part of that non-coalescence area. So.
Okay, so for absolute clarity, in adopted policy, it's not within a green wedge or coalescence area in the local plan or a neighbourhood plan.
Correct, as per the slide.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. Okay, we come then to Mr. Paul Sheldon Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, just a brief comment on housing first. On the face of it, green sites recommended look fair and reasonable. Our concerns, however, would be that the statement landscape impact on unapproved red sites is not strong enough. Government needs to be made aware we are surrounded by AONB land, and this needs to be protected or possible legal action may take place. Before the green sites are approved, however, no further house building should be built until we have invested into much improved sewage infrastructure across East Devon. The leadership of the council should have the gumption to ask the government for East Devon to be made a special case, as the current sewage infrastructure is not fit for purpose. Now, turning to Sidmouth 29. This has been vigorously rejected before by locals and even East Devon District Council over the last 15 years. The landowners, Fords, tried to turn into a residential application from an industrial application and now want to try again as an industrial site. In its location, it's probably the most stupid industrial planning application in the country. Sidmouth does not have an unemployment problem. It would create total misery for the people of Sidford, Sidbury and parts of Sidmouth. It's on a floodplain and should be located near existing infrastructure, namely Exeter Airport or Sky Park. We are convinced that the industrial site in Sidford was never about creating jobs, but a transfer of businesses from Alexandria Industrial Park in Sidmouth. We feel the government inspector has been duped in this matter. Simon Jupp MP, the previous MP, was totally against this site. I therefore urge all residents of Sidbury, Sidford, Sidmouth, if you care about the area's future, to write to the new MP, Richard Ford, expressing your desire to have this site never to be used for industrial purposes. Go onto Google and put in Sidford Business Park, a grubby history. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sheldon Matthews. Members, you will be aware that Councillor John Loudon, the ward member for this site, couldn't be here today. He's on holiday, nice for some, but he's sent round some comments for your consideration as well on this site. I have no further speakers then for Sidmouth 29, so we come to committee. Who would like to start us off? Silence on the floor. Was that Thummer? Oh, I've got two. Okay, we'll go with Councillor Hayward then.
Thank you. Obviously, the report seems to be at odds with local residents and ward members and other councillors. Can the planning officers give us any indication that they're aware of as to why the site to the south has not yet been built out? I appreciate that that's quite an open question, but I think it would help the committee to understand before we commit another piece of land why the piece below seemingly is still, if there is such a demand for jobs, why someone hasn't leapt at the chance to develop it.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is slightly speculation, as you say, but I think has been suggested the owners of the site have been trying to push the site for residential purposes, which would yield a much higher value. And I suspect that has influenced the value they're seeking for the site in their marketing of the site. And so I think that uncertainty and that potential opportunity has perhaps held back its delivery. And I would hope that through a clear decision through this process, we can decide either way whether or not that's considered appropriate and it would move forward for its appropriate purposes. This site is only this kind of northern second phase that's been highlighted. The main part of the site to the south already has planning permission. That planning permission has already been commenced. The material start has been made, and so that is not part of this process, only this expansion area. I think there is a question to be considered here in terms of the total quantum of employment land that's appropriate in this location, accepting that the southern area we assume will come forward for employment purposes as per the consent. And therefore, and also whether or not it would come forward in this plan period, or whether or not the extant consent on the southern area is sufficient in this plan period. That is a subjective judgment. As I said earlier, the evidence for employment land is district-wide. It is substantial. We're reluctant to lose sites, existing sites, particularly out of that process, because we do struggle to deliver employment land outside of the sort of west end of the district. And I don't think Sidmouth's seen any significant employment land delivered for some significant time. So there are some challenges there for members to bear in mind.
With that in mind, Chair, I personally am not convinced that this is an ideal site for employment industrial land. I've travelled down this road quite a lot. I can understand the reservations of residents and ward members, and indeed of Sidmouth Town Council in objection to this. So I'm happy to propose that we move on and disregard it at this time. Thank you.
Okay, we have a proposal then from Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Jess Bailey, that we move on from this site. I still have Councillors Ingham and Parr who'd indicated their wish to speak. Councillor Ingham.
Then my question is, then where? You know, where are the jobs going to be created for future generations in Sidmouth? Where can they work? Which offices? No, they must not commute to other settlements. They should be working in their home community. That's what we should at least try to offer them. And we have to allocate some land for offices, for business, for the local economy. And if we're moving on with this one, then perhaps we've got to come back with somewhere else in Sidmouth when we revisit this, to make sure that you don't have to drive to Sowton Industrial Estate or any other centre or the airport for a job if you live in Sidmouth. There's more to life than 40 years of working in social care if you live in Sidmouth. I think that's what I'd aspire to if I was 18. So we have to be mindful of what we do to our communities for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Parr.
Yes, Chair, I think you said something about comments from Councillor Loudon, but I haven't seen anything from him, and he is the ward member, so I would like to know the gist of what he said. Thank you.
Wendy, do you have a copy of those that you might be able to just read out, perhaps?
So Councillor Loudon has written, I've always disagreed that this site should be allocated as employment land. This site is directly opposite to sites SID 06A and SID 06B. Is abutting and Sidmouth 29 and 041B. The site is directly next to where the business park has already been designated as employment land. When the business park site was designated, this neighbouring site was also considered, and there was then a desire that once a high percentage of the business park had been allocated to businesses, that this site should be allowed to progress to development. Indeed, in that regard, this site has previously been allocated. At that point, it was expected that the owners of the business park would purchase the site to build an extension of neighbouring allocated business site. I believe the owners of 41B have relinquished any intention to extend into this site. The development of this site would lead to the loss of agricultural land in the AONB. It would lead to the creeping coalescence of Sidbury and Sidford, which is protected within the Sid Valley Neighbouring Plan. The use of this site for either employment or residential purposes would add to the already congested roads through Sidbury and School Street, part of Sidford, and this would impact negatively on these areas. This site cannot be considered in isolation to the permitted development at site 41B and the requested allocation of sites Sidmouth 06A and Sidmouth 06B, which are directly opposite. Allocating this site would have a negative impact upon the local community, the road network and the local vista. The A375 at this point is subject to regular significant flooding and subsequent regular closures, and therefore building on this site would not be appropriate. And he's shown a photograph. As ward member, I do not support allocating Sidmouth 29. That's it.
Thank you, Wendy. Councillor Hayward, you have already spoken, so I'm just going to check if anybody else wishes to speak first. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I mean, this site was refused by, delegated, I believe, for permission for industrial use, but then went to appeal and received it from the inspector. So, you know, the inspector thinks it's in the right place and it should be there. I think Mike can remember that as well, can't you, Mike?
Is it worth possibly clarifying if that's this site or the site to the south? Both. Both. Okay, thank you. Was that a hand from Councillor Blakey? I knew I saw one on the left somewhere. Councillor Blakey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a case, I think, where the views of the ward member really should should carry a lot of weight, because he knows the area very well. I think that objections by others have suggested that this really isn't an appropriate site to allocate for employment land at the moment. The question of coalescence between Sidbury, Sidford and the northern part of Sidmouth is also a valid point. So for me, I think that the proposal as put is not appropriate. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. I'll come back round to Councillor Hayward then.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the beauty of debate within this committee is because even though a proposal has been made, members can hear from other members and we can change our view almost, you know, in meeting. And taking Councillor Ingham's points that, you know, we have a duty to the younger people and those with aspirations to work, I still stand by my proposal. If the site to the south is built out and it doesn't deliver sufficient employment land, it's not as if Sidmouth 29 land is going to just vaporise and disappear. It will still be there. It will still be in the ownership, and there will be other opportunities in the future. So if the site below is built out and fails to deliver all the employment opportunities that the residents, the younger people and elsewhere demand, then this can come back. All we're proposing today is that we move on. The site will still be available, and in future manifestations of local plans, long after we're gone, perhaps there'll be another opportunity. But until you build out the one below and you explore those opportunities, you'll never know. But simply reallocating, allocating more and more, but not actually delivering on those sites. And East Devon, ourselves. We have challenges with land we own to build out. So there are challenges to build them out. There's financial challenges, planning challenges, or logistical challenges. So I stand by my proposal, Chair, that we move this one on, and I believe it's been seconded. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, just to clarify on the planning position here, I've just checked on our system and it is the southern area that benefits from the extant consent. There was an outline consent previously for the whole area, but that was rejected. So there is no extant consent for this northern area that's before you today. I mean, just to clarify, and to think in terms of the current local plan, there is an allocation for the southern area, and then this northern area effectively has an allocation, but it's dependent on delivery of an element of the southern area. I can't remember what proportion off the top of my head, but if members are concerned about whether or not this area is needed in this plan period, you could take a similar approach to a future allocation and have it triggered by completion of an element of the southern, just as a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay, Councillor Hayward is quite right. We have a proposal that has been seconded. Does anybody else wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case we come to a vote on what I suspect will be our first split decision of the day. The proposal is to move on from this site from Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Jess Bailey. All those in favour? Can we have hands nice and high, please, members? One end of the table thinks it's 8, the other thinks it's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4.
7.
I see 7. Shall we go with 7? 7 in favour of the proposal to move on. Those against? I see 2. And those abstaining? 2. Okay, the numbers add up. Very good. In which case, the proposal to move on is carried. And we move to the next site, Sidmouth 30. Again, not proposed for allocation. Does anybody... No, I have nobody registered to speak on this site. Does anybody on committee wish to speak? No, in which case, I'll propose from the chair that we move on from this site. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. We come then to site Sidmouth 02, and we're now in Sidmouth Sidford ward for members' awareness. So site Sidmouth 02 then, I have no members of the public registered to speak. It's not proposed for allocation. Does anybody on committee wish to speak? No, in which case I'll propose from the chair that we move on in line with officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. We come then to site Sidmouth 04, again not proposed for allocation, and I have nobody registered to speak. Does anybody on committee wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case, in line with officer's recommendation, I'll propose from the chair that we move on from Sidmouth 04. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Which brings us then to Sidmouth 06, A and B, partially proposed for allocation. The southeastern portion you see there, site Sidmouth 06A, and I have Ms. Liz Adcock registered to speak first. I hope I've pronounced that right. I have a Miss Liz Adcock and a Liz Lees. Oh, I see. Right, okay. Yeah, no, Liz Lees is on my list as well. Sorry for the confusion there. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Barlow. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee for letting me speak today. I'm a Sidford resident and member of 2 local community groups. I'm here to put forward my concerns relating building allocation sites numbers 6A and 6B, previously referred to Site 6. More housing will mean more people, more pressure on local infrastructure, that is struggling with the current population. My autistic son attends a local mainstream school with approximately 120 other SEND children. The schools are struggling to meet SEND needs. Regarding roads, Sidford Cross is already a challenge for locals. There are 4 busy roads and 1 pedestrian crossing. There are no filter traffic lights, so often cars accelerate to turn or risk getting stuck in the middle on a red. Site 6A is in close proximity to Sidbury Castle, Fire Beacon Hill, a local nature reserve and core copse. These nature reserves and surrounding fields are essential habitats for wildlife. I have been fortunate to witness deer, kingfisher, tree creepers, bats in flight, visiting osprey, and only yesterday evening, hundreds of swallows preparing to migrate. There is a brook at the bottom of Site 6A that wildlife rely on for their water source. We should be finding ways to enhance and protect East Devon's wildlife, to keep it flourishing for today and for future generations. And finally, a quote posted on Instagram this summer by the Princess of Wales. We need to encourage people of all ages to reconnect with nature and learn more about how we can protect our natural world. The power of nature to support our development and well-being, both by bringing us joy and helping keep us physically, mentally and spiritually healthy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lees. I have then 2 ward members registered to speak. If you'd like to step up to the public speaking podium, and we'll start with Councillor Rixon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. Councillor Loudon's comments regarding development of the land adjacent to Sidmouth 29, that is Sidmouth 09, also relate to Sidmouth 06A and 06B. Development would lead directly to the further loss of agricultural land in the national landscape and would result in more creeping coalescence of Sidbury and Sidford, contrary to the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan. Similarly, he commented on the regular significant flooding and road closures which result. This, despite the efforts of Devon County Council Highways to resolve the flooding issues at Two Bridges Road last year by cutting back the much expanded hedgerow that had grown over the drains next to Sidmouth 06A and rodding the drains to ensure they were running clear. Their efforts were in vain, as this has not solved the problem, possibly because surface water cascades down Ottery Lane and the field at Sidmouth 06AB, together with stones, etc., directly leading to flooding in this area. And whereas floodwater used to drain away across the land at Sidmouth 29, this has now been prevented as the owners have built up the gateway to ensure that floodwater cannot drain onto their land. Presumably, when this site is developed, whether for employment, housing, or possibly a mix of both, the entrance will be raised on a permanent basis to prevent the ingress of floodwater. I strongly object to development of Sidmouth 6A and subsequently 6B due to coalescence, flooding, and the additional congestion of the highway between Sidbury and Sidford, which will result from this allocation, together with other proposed developments in Two Bridges Road and Sidbury. If coalescence is not resisted, Sidbury will be absorbed into the wider Sidmouth catchment. This has already happened to Sidford, which also used to have its own separate identity, and biodiversity will be severely impacted as wildlife will be restricted to an even narrower corridor and flyway. Thank you, Committee.
And now for what I believe might be his maiden speech to Strategic Planning Committee, Councillor Goodman, welcome.
Yes, it is the first time I've spoken, and I'm going to be very brief because you've already heard two excellent speeches on what I couldn't possibly disagree with. I have to agree with the two speakers who have gone before, and also I want to agree with what Chris Lockyer said regarding the reasons to object to this. It would encroach upon the green wedge between Ford and Sidbury. It would undermine the key objective of the important Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan, which aims to maintain the separation, which is really important, between the settlements. In addition, the site is part of the national landscape, and you've heard some really passionate concerns about what would happen to nature. And we have already declared ecological emergency, and this is the sort of thing that would not be protecting our wildlife. And allowing further development would set a precedent, which is a concern of mine, for future building in this very sensitive area. Moreover, as Councillor Rickson said, it is known and prone for flooding. However, I understand how difficult it is for committees to make decisions on planning, and this is why I have to agree with Councillor Barlow what he said, that we need homes, but we need homes and we need employment in the right place with the right infrastructure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodman. Short and sweet, just the way we like it. Could you turn the microphone off, please? Or somebody. Thank you, Mr. Ely. Okay, I have no further members of the public wishing to speak. We come then into committee members. Councillor Howe.
Yeah, I'll be the killjoy, I suppose. We've heard excellent speakers, as always, as we do, but virtually everything they've said relates to anywhere in Devon. We have already allocated in Exmouth in National Landscape because we have no choice. And if we don't allocate here, and I get the coalescence bit, but there is quite a distance between the two communities. You know, yes, it's shrinking, but it's not shrinking by much. This is 30 homes we're talking on a road, no highways objections. Healthcare is healthcare. It's the same everywhere in Devon. All the other infrastructure is just the same as everywhere else in Devon. Sidmouth, like every other community, and Sidmouth is a good-sized community, has unfortunately to take some pain as well as the rest of us. So as such, I will regretfully go with officer's recommendation for this and say yes.
Is that a proposal, Councillor Howe?
I'm happy to make that a proposal, unfortunately, yes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howe. Does anybody wish to second that proposal? Councillor Davey, do you wish to speak?
Yes, well, Councillor Howe's pretty much said it. We've only got 3 sites in the whole of the Sidmouth area that are shown as green on the map. This is a relatively small one. It's 30 dwellings. It's tucked on the end of the settlement, and I understand the fears of coalescence, but there are several fields between Sidmouth, Sidford and Sidbury, whether we can say enough is enough and this is the end of it, I don't know. But given that it's one of the few sites that officers have considered is acceptable and it has less landscape impact, which is the major problem with most of them, then I feel like Councillor Howe, somewhat reluctantly, but I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. We have a proposal to allocate, just to clarify, allocate 6A rather than the whole site?
Oh, yes.
Yep, okay, just for Damien's benefit there. And I have Councillor Jess Bailey to speak next.
Thank you. So looking at all the green recommended sites together, it looks to me like it's under 200 houses. And I'd just like to, I know we don't have specific targets for any of our villages or any of our settlements, but I'd just like to ask officers, please, how many dwellings are there currently in Sidmouth, roughly, so that we get a sense this is a tier 2 settlement, so we get a sense, and I'm not suggesting that we have to be, you know, every tier 2 gets a certain number of houses, but I'm equally very conscious that some of our other towns are getting potentially substantially more. So I just want to get just gauge where we are with Sidmouth. Thank you.
Mr. Freeman has just whispered in my ear, "Give me a minute." So we'll give him a minute to answer that question. But thank you, Councillor Bailey. I've just found an article in the Sidmouth Herald from 2017, which says Sidmouth has 7,885 households, but that is 7 years out of date now. So Mr. Freeman will find a figure there. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, and thank you to the speakers who've come before. You know, if only the area where I lived was surrounded on 3 sides by national landscapes and with the protection that affords. My opposition to this, aside from the objections from ward members and councillors, and noting the point that the Vice Chair has made, if not here, where, just the density of this for 6A just strikes me as too much. We've had a significant number of dwellings in Axminster where the density has essentially necessitated gardens that are no bigger than a postage stamp, really. And just on the balance of that, I can't see how you would provide 60 dwellings unless you go up and you start building apartments and such like. And I don't think that's the proposal in such a sensitive area within the national landscape area. So on the basis of that, I can't support Councillor Howe's proposal, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. I have no other members who've indicated they wish to speak yet. Does anybody else wish to speak? Otherwise, we have a proposal on the table. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. And it comes back to the question that if it's not going to be here, then where? And Sidmouth does have to participate in what we're trying to do. If ward members feel desperately that the sites that the officers have identified, which are the ones that they would develop, you know, we've got to resolve this somehow. And I think this is one of the better of the worst proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. I believe Mr. Freeman has part of an answer for us.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, I can't answer the question in terms of numbers of dwellings. What I've looked at is our role and function assessment study, which looks at the size of the settlements in the district by population size relative to one another, which I think was the core of the question, was the relative size of the settlement to others. And it lists Sidmouth as the 3rd largest settlement in the district, sorry, the 2nd largest behind Exmouth, with a population of 13,280 as of 2019, making it a slightly larger population than Honiton.
And ONS figures from the 2021 census estimate that between Sidmouth Town and Sidmouth Sid Ford, there's 6,000 households, but that excludes Sidmouth Rural, obviously, which has some on the east side of Sidmouth as well. Okay, any other members wish to speak on this site? I know you do. Nice try, Councillor Barlow. Okay, in which case I understand the proposer wants to sum up before we come to a vote.
It's not so much about sum up, but I do need to query Councillor Hayward because he's talked about housing numbers. We haven't thought our officers think could accommodate. It's not a full planning application, and housing numbers and density and everything else would have to be determined at a full planning application. So as such, your objection really doesn't hold weight in this. It's whether it's suitable for development or not. And here's what we think it might take, but not what it will. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Is it worth asking perhaps, Mr. Freeman, whether you could clarify how the 30 number has been reached?
Yes, certainly we have a standard methodology through the HELAR process, the Housing Employment Land Availability Assessment work, which is an agreed methodology with the neighbouring authorities in Exeter, Teignbridge and Mid Devon, which is used to calculate based on average densities, taking out the undevelopable parts of the site and working out an appropriate number. So it's a standard methodology. It may come out as slightly higher than that, it may be slightly lower than that. It's just a guide at this stage, as Councillor House says.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Do any other members wish to speak before we come to a vote? Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. So just to be clear, we've got to deliver 20,000 houses, roughly. There's 200 proposed for Sidmouth as the second largest settlement. Is that correct?
For the benefit of the stream, yes. Okay, we have a proposal then from Councillor House, seconded by Councillor Davey, to allocate site 06A for the Regulation 19 draft of the local plan. All those members in favour of allocating 06A? I see 7. Hands nice and high, please, members. Go on, Kevin, you can do it. 7, okay. Those members against? I count 3. Councillor Brown never puts his hand up very high. And any abstentions? Councillor Parr. Okay, the proposal to allocate 6A is carried then, members. We come to then site Sidmouth 19, which is not proposed for allocation. Do any members wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case I'll move from the chair that we move on in line with officer's recommendation. Members, all those in favour, please. Thank you, that's unanimous. We come then to site Sidmouth 20, again, not proposed for allocation. Do any members wish to speak on this one? No, okay, in which case I will move from the chair that we move on from this site. Those members in favour? That's unanimous again. Site 22, again, not recommended for allocation at Alexandria Industrial Estate. Again, no public speakers. Members, does anybody wish to speak? No, in which case I'll move from the chair in line with officer's recommendation that we move on. Members, those in favour, please. Thank you, that's carried unanimously. Do I need to slow down for you, Mr. Hunter? Or you?
I think we were just questioning whether
what's happened to
should have been a
site
vote
6B?
on 06B.
Oh, do you want us to vote separately on 6B as well?
Yeah.
We haven't voted on 6B.
Okay,
so,
sorry.
yes.
Back to 6B then, members, and I'll move from the chair that we move on from 6B in line with officer's recommendation. Those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Sorry, Mr. Hunter. Are you caught up?
No, happy now.
Okay.
Sorry, who was that proposed by and seconded?
I proposed that from the chair.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Site Sidmouth 28, Church Street Car Park. No members of the public registered to speak. Do any members on committee wish to speak? Councillor Hayward.
Thanks, Chair. Just simply to propose that we move on. This is a well-used car park. It provides amenity for shoppers. Certainly, I think it would be detrimental to the businesses nearby if this were converted. You know, it's not a derelict site. It's not a brownfield site. It's a usable car park. It's economically active. So I propose we move on from it.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Do we have a seconder? I saw Councillor Levine first. Sorry, Councillor Davey. In which case then, do any other members wish to speak? No? Okay, we have a proposal from Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Levine, to move on from site 28. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Sidmouth 31 then, breaking the chain of a long list of sites where the only person talking is me. This site is proposed for allocation. We don't, however, have any members of the public registered to speak, so we come straight to members. Does anybody wish to speak on this site? Councillor Ingham.
I propose it goes forward as recommended by officers.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Seconded by Councillor Ledger. Does anybody wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case we'll go to a vote. We have a proposal to allocate site Sidmouth 31 from Councillor Ingham, seconded Councillor Ledger. All those in favour? That's unanimous. And then site Sidmouth 32, which is split between 32A and 32B. I believe 32A being the southern part of the site and 32B the northern. I can't quite see on that, but yes, that's correct. And I have, again, the ward members. So, Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. I support Sidmouth Town Council's analysis of this allocation and the benefits that could ensue. Planning gain may outweigh national landscape considerations as a result at this location. However, I would only support this allocation at Sidmouth 32A on the proviso that developers are required to deliver the right type of housing for the Sid Valley in accordance with housing policies 12 and 13 of the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan. As Sidmouth has one of the oldest demographics in the country, this site must deliver housing for local people, not more second homes, to ensure that Sidmouth remains a vibrant community long term. Note, Sidmouth has 6% or more second homes already, and further reduction of owner-occupied homes must be restricted as far as possible. The Town Council are also in favour of a park and change at this location to support local employment. Could the addition of e-bikes also be a possibility here? Could this reduce pressure on council car parks in high season and potentially encourage more people to use active travel more widely? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Councillor Goodman.
Mine will be short. I would just like to agree completely with what Councillor Rickson said. I think she's summed up much better than I can, and I'd like to support her. I think it's a right thing to do. And I also agree with her about the e-bikes and the parking change. I think that's absolutely right. I think it's the right place to build houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodman. I wonder, Mr. Freeman, if you could offer committee any clarity on the issue of second homes and local ties, etc.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, it is a challenging area because I appreciate the desire to deliver homes that are meeting the needs of local people. But local needs ties are a challenging thing, I think, in planning terms and difficult to justify. I think the best we can do is, and we envisage this, I think, in the plan anyway, is requiring all housing sites to deliver a mix of housing that marries up with the needs identified in our local housing needs assessment. So we're delivering the types of homes that are needed and a mix of housing that's addressing local need. And then in terms of affordable housing, we'll obviously have requirements in terms of the proportion of affordable housing that will have to be led by what's viable and deliverable. And then affordable housing usually is tied in terms of, because that's specifically to meet the local needs, and would have planning obligations in terms of initially meeting the needs of people within the local area, and then it cascades out if the homes are not occupied by those within those needs. So that's the best we can do as I see it in terms of addressing those issues in terms of local need. Hopefully that gives some reassurance, but I don't think we can go as far as seeking to tie all new housing in a particular area to residents of that area, unfortunately.
I'm glad you added unfortunately there, Mr. Freeman. Okay, I have no further public speakers registered to speak, so we come then to committee. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I propose 32A for allocation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Do we have a second? I saw Councillor Parr's hand a fraction before Councillor Ledger's. So we have a proposal then from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Parr. Does anybody else wish to speak on 32A? Councillor Davey.
I'm just looking at this one on the map. It makes absolute sense not to allocate 32B, which it looks as though is an area possibly scrub, I don't know it, and trees. Could make a very good amenity area for the residents of that development. And for that reason, is there any merit in allocating the whole site on with the assumption, oh, no, we can't assume, with the proviso that that area is kept as an amenity site, or could that happen anyway without allocating the whole area?
Thank you, Councillor Davey. I suspect the answer is that that could happen anyway, but Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, I think it could happen there anyway. We have to be careful, as I said in relation to Mr. Ely's proposal, that we're not seeking to secure levels of open space that are beyond what's necessary to meet the needs of the residential development without doing a rather complex calculation. I couldn't work that out, but it looks like it's quite a bit larger than would actually be needed. But obviously the applicant could propose that they meet the open space requirements, at least through part of that area, and could, as a consequence, deliver a wider area if they wished. There just wouldn't be a planning obligation. So that may well be the end result, but I don't think we need to allocate that area to achieve that necessarily.
It could also help deliver biodiversity net gain, couldn't it, if they brought that forward, yeah.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. I think this site is one where it demonstrates that Sidmouth, is able to play its part to the conundrum that faces the entire district, and certainly with the Walbrook Road access, it's a very good road. It's good connectivity, so I think this is a perfect site for inclusion. And I endorse everything that Councillor Davey said about the wider amenity value of that space. Certainly, I wouldn't be in favour of tarmacking it over to provide a parking change at the negative connotations of all that amenity biodiverse value.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Do any other members wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case we have a proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Parr, I believe, to allocate 32A. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And I will move then from the chair that we move on from 32B. Those members in favour? Unanimous. Okay. Thank you very much, members. We come then to site Sidmouth 35, not proposed for allocation. Do any members wish to speak? No, in which case I'll propose from the chair that we move on from this site. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. That brings us to the end of the Sidmouth Sid Ford sites then. Members, would you like a short break now, or should we push through? I see some nods, so we will take a 6-minute break until 11:30. Councillor Ingham? I think I may have banged my gavel slightly prematurely as we're still missing half of committee. And if they're not here for the start of the discussion, they can't vote. So perhaps we'll give it another 2 minutes and frown at councillors Hayward, Ingham and Bailey when they come back in. There he is. Okay, we will get started again then. Straight in with Sidbury in Sidmouth Rural Ward, and we come to site 34A and 34B. We have a number of public speakers registered for this site, so I'll come first to Mr. Neil Robinson, is it? Have I pronounced that right? Brilliant.
Thank you very much. I have the benefit, you might say, of being totally surrounded by what's planned at the First Hill Farmhouse. And my wife Caroline and I have lived there for 27 years. To the north of us, which is one of the main sites, the ground is very steep and is a maze of terracotta land drains to try and keep it usable. When the electricity board came to undertake the reinstatement of the high voltage cable which runs through part of the site, they demolished several of these drains, and the end result of that was that we had a sort of sludgy river running down our drive and down to the main road below. So the indication there is that the water is a huge problem. The flood is something that must be addressed, and we have suffered from part of this in so much that it's flows into our property. And we've had to take some protective measures to survive that. Just recently, over the last year or two or three, there's been some quite serious flooding along Burnt Oak to the properties on the eastern side. Several really serious damage done. Now, the next thing is the road outside and the access. We suffer numerous problems outside our place, in so much that the eastern gable of the farmhouse, the listed farmhouse, encroaches quite a bit into the road, or makes a pinch point at this position. The situation there is that we collect lots of broken wing mirrors and glass from those that have been impacting on the property. So the whole road system is absolutely jammed in our place, and sometimes we have a jam that lasts, could be 10 minutes, while people argue about who has to shift backwards or forwards. We can't understand if there's any plans for the sewage capacity, which again we understand is fully utilised at present from Sidbury to the pumping station or the treatment works. We've got a lack of school capacity in Sidbury for young pupils, and all secondary pupils have to go to Sidmouth. There's no routing for them to get there except by car, basically. The steep hill outside, which I've been referring to on the north side, is very, very steep and will be very expensive to develop, in so much that the earthworks, the general drainage works and other will be very, very significant, and may well have a weighting on the decision as to affordable housing or not. The other thing is that we've got very limited public transport options, lack of doctor or pharmacy close by. Provision for the completed footpath is another issue. It's been held as a cherry, basically, to soften the impact of the building works. I think the whole footpath should be separated and just done in advance of everything else, because it's absolutely critical. It's been talked about that all the 27 years that we've lived in Sidbury. Finally, there's no really clear supporting claim for the affordable housing. I think we must tie down the fact that this is very, very, very serious issue, in so much that on the drawing which has been prepared, it seems to me that it all looks as if they're quite large properties. So I think the actual sustainability and the detached houses for first-time buyers should be a premium. So I think that's just about it. I think there's an awful lot of things that really are grey, so grey, that needs approaching all the way through.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
I have then Mr. Philip Bragg from the Sid Vale Association again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representing the Sid Vale Association, we've canvassed both members of our planning group I'm chair of, and also local residents who are members of the Sid Vale Association, and there is considerable opposition to this proposal, the residential development of 34A, and for that reason Sid Vale Association objects to this proposal. And the reasons are, first of all, the loss of land, agricultural land, to within the national landscape, former AONB, for residential purposes. And in conjunction with that, this proposal is next to a listed heritage site, Firs Hill Farm, a Grade 2 listed building.
Second objection is that 34A, if it progresses, will naturally lead on to the larger development 34B at a later date, which again is undesirable. Our third reason to object is the negative impact on the local environment and biodiversity. There's our members report barn owls and all sorts of other wild bird species in the area that would be affected by a new development, and I know the District Council is trying to promote biodiversity. The fourth objection is the access to the site is not easy from the A375, so to our mind it'll have to come from Firs Hill, and it'll cause increased traffic for access from the narrow Chapel Street, so we don't see this as an easy site to develop. The final objection is the increased traffic hazard. It's already a problem in Sidbury that does have technically a speed limit 20 miles an hour that's rarely observed, and with increased population and traffic, it's going to cause more of a hazard. And while local members reports it's already dangerous for taking children to the primary school on the other side of the street to the north in Sidbury, and there's a lack of pedestrian crossing, so it's dangerous for children. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ragg. Councillor Lockyer, I have you on this one as well. Did you want to add anything?
I've already commented on this.
Okay, thank you. In which case then we come to Mr. Dan Yates, the agent, on behalf of Sidbury LVA LLP.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Dan Yates, planning agent on behalf of Sidbury LVA LLP, the land promoter for the land between Firs Hill and Hillside, Sidbury. The site has been assessed by officers in the latest site selection report in two parts, and we know officers recommend in that report that only the northern part of the site should be allocated 38 homes and some employment land. Whilst we fully support the proposed allocation of the northern part of the site, we continue to maintain that all of the land 34A and 34B should be allocated in the local plan review. We've been promoting the whole site over recent years, including representations to the last consultation in June. At that time, the site was a second choice site in the plan. Our representations to previous consultations have confirmed that the whole site is suitable for development and have emphasised the benefits of allocating all rather than part of the site. We've also undertaken wider public consultation this year on the draft proposals for the site and received a number of helpful responses from the local community. The benefits of allocating the whole site include the ability to deliver a second phase to the Devon County Council multi-use path in order to provide a safe and secure route into the heart of Sidbury, overlooked by new housing. We note the report prepared by all your officers highlights the need for safe walking routes, and that is something that the site can deliver. We've also explained through our recent public consultation the benefits of bringing forward the whole site to provide flexibility to accommodate around 50 homes rather than 38, providing a slightly higher number of homes by making best use of the whole site would make a significant contribution to address the local affordable housing need, with over 200 households currently on the local housing waiting list. The emerging proposals are supported by a range of technical assessments, which demonstrate the whole site is suitable for development. This includes some of the matters highlighted in the report prepared by your officers, including access, drainage, and landscape impacts. An access design for the access into the site from Chapel Street has already been agreed in principle with the Highways Authority. This will in turn help to serve the whole site rather than just the northern parcel from Firs Hill, which would instead become a pedestrian access. Bringing forward the whole site will also provide additional flexibility to provide more open space and biodiversity net gains. Overall, we fully support the allocation of the site, but consider it would be beneficial to allocate all of the land between Firs Hill and Hillside in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Members, just to note that Councillor Loudon sent round some comments on this as ward member on Thursday the 5th at 11:34. Would members like me to read those, I see some nods. Okay, Councillor Ingham. Microphone, Councillor Ingham.
After you've done that, Chair, I'd like to hear from Mr. Freeman in his response to what the potential developers have said about the A and B and bringing them both forward, and also for his appraisal of what the speakers said with regards to drainage. So what are the risks that we're considering and which ones should we accept or dismiss? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Mr. Freeman, you're on notice. I'll come to you in a moment. If I just get up Councillor Loudon's comments on number 34. Okay, so taking 34B first, Councillor Loudon agrees that the sections within 34B should not be allocate. He has concerns about this larger section of the site as it would be inaccessible from the A375 or the narrow single track Ebden Lane next to Hillside. It would be overbearing and overlooking the properties of Burnt Oak on the A375. It would probably, his words, add to the water runoff that already runs down Ebden Lane, flooding the A375 at Burnt Oak and has recently flooded some properties there. If the site sits within the AONB, now National Landscape, on steep sloping agricultural land and which is adjacent to the Grade 2 listed Firs Hill Farm, and it could have a detrimental impact upon it. That's 34B. 34A, Councillor Loudon has concerns about allocating as a site. It could have almost 40 properties built on it. This is bound to lead to additional residents' vehicles entering and exiting the site. It would have a dangerous access point if it was allowed to be on the A375 at Chapel Street. The only alternative access point would be through the residential road through Firs Hill, next to a playing field and an EDDC children's play area. The photograph at page 113 of the reports pack shows how narrow the immediate access via Firs Hill to the site would be. On the left-hand side are the frontages of properties, and on the right-hand side, the parking spaces in front of the properties would have to be removed to allow the access to be widened. The Firs Hill access would be required to facilitate equipment reaching the site during its development, and given the bullet points I've just mentioned, Councillor Loudon believes that would not be safe or appropriate. Allocating the site could create a potential vehicle bottleneck at the War Memorial junction of Greenhead, into which Firs Hill leads, and at the A375 where Chapel Street leads into Fore Street. According to local informal consultation documents issued on the 18th of June 2024 by Savills regarding this site, the landowner/developer's potential vehicular access to the site would be from the A375, with potential pedestrian access being via Firs Hill. This is at odds with the suggestion of page 113 of the reports pack that access might be possible via Firs Hill. If for no other reason than traffic traversing through a narrow residential Firs Hill road, it would be inappropriate to allocate any parts of this site for employment. The site sits within the AONB on steep sloping agricultural land and which is adjacent to the Grade 2 listed Firs Hill Farm, could have a detrimental impact upon it. Devon County Council states that while Sidmouth Primary School has some capacity to support some development, Sidmouth Primary School has no capacity to support development and no ability to expand the existing school. And lastly, at present, there is no planning permission granted to any part of a potential cycle path/pedestrian link between Sidbury and Sidford. According to the County Council, any planning permission that might be granted would need to be extended from the usual 3-year commencement period, to 10 years due to the need to obtain external funding. Therefore, the opportunity gain on page 112 of the reports pack deriving from this site is speculative, and as a result, as ward member, Councillor Loudon does not support the allocation of either 34A or B. And with all that said, I'm going to stop talking and come to Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So I think Councillor Ingham was sort of questioning the assessment here in terms of sites A and B. My understanding is the main distinction is A is sort of on the lower part of the site and so less prominent in the landscape. The B parts of the site are sort of rising land within the national landscape and so become notably more sensitive in terms of the landscape character of the area and the impact on the wider landscape and views in and out of the site. There is obviously also an issue of the more development you put around the listed building, the more sensitive and more impact you have on the setting of the listed building as well. I think there was some issues raised around the access arrangements. I think the agent identified a number of opportunities by allocating the larger area in terms of the access arrangements and walking and cycling routes through there, which we acknowledge, but don't feel that those benefits, as it were, would overcome the landscape harm arising from the wider site being allocated. The report, I think, envisages access coming in from Firs Hill, and the comments from Devon County Highways acknowledge that, albeit there would need to be some potential improvement to that, given that it's quite narrow at the moment. I think the other point that was raised was about drainage arrangements. I work on the basic principle that new developments will have to deliver a surface water drainage scheme that delivers at least an equal situation to the greenfield that's there. It can't worsen that situation, and it can't lead to surface water running onto adjoining land. So the drainage situation is more of an engineering solution that's needed to address that rather than a reason not to allocate the site, I would suggest. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. We have no further public speakers, so I come to committee members. Who wants to start us off? Councillor Levine. Your microphone, Councillor Levine. Your microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I drive quite regularly between Honiton and Sidmouth, and driving through Sidbury is a nightmare. The road is narrow, cars parked on both sides of the road, so I think access problems is a real issue here, and a grave issue, because if you are not awake driving through Sidbury, you are going to cause an accident. Secondly, what I don't understand in the paper is, it tells me that any development should be kept to this end of the site, Sidbury 34B. Should it be Sidbury 34A? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Levine. Our first typo of the day in this 300-page report pack. Some were bound to get through. Members, you're on notice. You're going to get another 900 pages by the end of the week. Have some sympathy for our officers. And of course, Councillor Levine, I hope you weren't suggesting that we think drivers are going to be driving asleep behind the wheel from those comments, because of course we'd hope they are all awake.
Sometime I wonder.
There we go. Okay, Councillor Ingham, did I see your hand?
Yes, Chair. From what I've heard, I'd like to propose that we allocate 34A and move on regarding 34B.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Does anybody wish to second that proposal? I saw Councillor Blakey's hand first. Are you wishing to second, Councillor Blakey? Do you wish to speak?
No, I think the report makes it's brief but clear, and it makes perfect sense to me. So that's the reason.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ledger.
I'm really struggling with this one because the DCC have said that improvements need to be made to Firs Hill, but what improvements can they make? Can they acquire front gardens off residents? Is that what they're planning on doing? It's you can't get a direct link in from Chapel Street that would be a safe access point. It's on a bend. It's already a huge issue there in Sidbury. So, are we just going to allocate this and then go, oh, it's a more of a problem? Because that's what it seems like we're saying for this.
Councillor Ingham.
Chair, sure, if they can't overcome it, they won't get permission.
I suspect then we'd come up to the argument in Planning Committee that highways impacts have to be severe, which so often is the stick with which we are beat as members, metaphorically, of course. Councillor Hayward, did I see your hand?
Thank you. I mean, I'm minded to agree with Councillor Ledger, having just looked at sort of a well-known internet site, Street View, and followed it all the way through the residential estate above. I can't see how that's a credible entrance to the site. But it comes back to this issue of our role as strategic planning. Do we allocate a site simply to make up numbers, almost knowing in the future that planning won't be able to deliver it because it's not safe to do so? That's a challenge for us. You know, I'm minded not to. It's proximity to, I mean, on balance, proximity to a grade 2 listed building, difficult access on a road that's already incredibly challenging to drive down, that congestion at Greenhead at the War Memorial site, access from the residential estate above. For me, it just ticks so many negative boxes that I'm finding it difficult to support this one. As 34A, 34B simply is a site that it is so constrained by geography, and it eats into the AONB national landscape far too much and would be very visible and very intrusive. So I'm going to find myself erring on the side of voting against this. Thank you, Chair.
I believe Mr. Freeman can offer us some insight on the access issue, and then I'll come to Councillor Davey.
Well, all I was... Let's try that again. I'm not sure what happened there. Yes, so I was just going to make the point that, as I understand it, I think the driveway through from First Hill is actually owned by the council, as are some of the adjoining houses. Maybe some additional land needed, and we may or may not agree to that as a council. But I just make that point that you know, there are opportunities potentially there to widen that. There may still be a pinch point that is a single car width. But having said that, if you look at a lot of modern developments, often as a highway authority, they recommend that you have design in those sorts of pinch points as traffic calming measures in any event. So I don't think that in itself would be a barrier to delivering the site, but there are some challenges in terms of how you deliver the access, certainly.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I mean, the first comment I get from residents whenever a development of any size is proposed is it's going to add to the traffic. And I appreciate, I've driven through Sidbury as well, and I was very awake, Councillor Levine. Yeah, I appreciate there are difficulties, but that's the same all over the county. There are too many cars on the road, and usually I'm one of them. And I appreciate I came here by car today, but I do think that we can't just reject every site on the question of car use. And I do note that there is actually some proposal for some kind of sustainable travel proposals as part of this site as well. So I don't think that's a sufficient reason for rejecting it, although I think the access, that is going to be an issue. If you look at the photo of First Hill, it's very narrow indeed. So I think there'd be some work to do on access, but when we allocate a site like this, we're not actually saying that's it, done deal. All we're saying is you can come forward with a planning application, and then at that point we can assess it and decide whether the other matters add up.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Before I come to Councillor Howe, Councillor Faithful, do you have any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know this site quite well, funnily enough, having driven there many a times, day and night. The issue with traffic is exactly as Councillor Davey has said. Unless we're going to say no to development in Sidford, Sidmouth and Honiton, either side of the road, and say you can't come off the A30 or any other road and go to Sidmouth, traffic's going to increase. So a development in the middle of the road isn't going to make any difference in that respect, because that traffic is going to keep increasing. I have real doubts about access. I really do. But as Councillor Davey again has said, that is more for a planning application. Highways haven't objected. They have said options are available, and that worries me a great deal. The only other thing I want to pick up is what residents and speakers spoke earlier about is it's grade 3 agricultural land. And as we go through these meetings, a lot of the development sites are actually grade 1 and 2. So this being grade 3 is actually quite low grade. Could be grade 3A, still considered best and most versatile, but it's not as good as grade 1 and 2, which most of the West End actually encompasses. So we've got to be mindful. Again, it is a tier 4 settlement. I'm struggling, although I don't want to say yes to it because of my concerns of highways. I'm at the same time struggling to see proper reasons not to, being as highways aren't forcibly objecting.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. Sorry, could you just clarify the 35 metres from a habitat of principal importance? In the ecology section, somebody.
I'm going to look to one of our three. Mr. Coles.
I can't find that offhand, but I can certainly clarify that with you if you give me a few moments. Come back to you.
Okay, do any other members wish to speak on this site? No? Okay, in which case, no pressure, Mr. Coles.
Going to have to open my GIS, I'm afraid, so I'm not sure how long it's going to take.
Okay, do you want us to wait, Councillor Bailey? Okay. No, of course. I think unusually today we have the time to wait for a moment, unlike last week. No comment.
I mean, maybe I'll just say in the interim, I really don't like it, but it's just, I don't like this app. I just don't like this site. But I'm struggling because I don't really like any of the green development on green fields and open countryside. So
I suspect that's a sentiment most on this committee probably share. How are we getting on, Mr. Coles?
Still waiting, I'm afraid.
Still waiting. Shall we take the vote on site 34B first, as that's proposed to move on? Sorry, Councillor Ingham?
Chair, a reasonable question would be, would the answer affect Councillor Bailey's voting pattern? If the answer's no, then we can vote now, can't we?
Okay, it might do. Is it going to change your vote on 34B? No. In which case, we have a proposal to move on from 34B from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Blakey. So those in favour of moving on from 34B only. That's unanimous. Mr. Coles, it's the do or die moment. Councillor Ledger?
Just to eat up some time, Chair. When we, as we're moving forward with this process, could we get some clarification from Devon Highways on their proposed plans and what they
just their plans generally?
What they plan to do with regards to access to
for this site
specifically? For this site specifically, because I'm still struggling to see how they can open up the capacity on it, even with Mr. Freeman's comments.
I think it's probably worth saying at this point that just because we're saying yes to things today doesn't mean definitely, absolutely 100%.
Of course.
It makes it vastly more likely than not that they will end up as an allocation. But there we go. Mr. Freeman, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Well, all I was going to say is that a county will, as the Highway Authority, will just be looking at the principle. So really they're just saying in principle an access through First Hill can be achieved. It will be for the developer to design that access and the details of that and agree that with the Highway Authority and ourselves through the planning application process. So we're kind of in their hands, but we have to trust that the Highway Authority have done their homework and due diligence and our consent that in principle it can be made acceptable.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. On the basis that in principle, if you have a bulldozer, you can get access to pretty much anywhere. Is this something with your chairship, that strategic planning should consider in future, perhaps when we've not quite so tied up with site allocations, as to our relationship with Devon Highways, Devon County Council, and their responses? That may be also shared across all town and parish councils, but certainly from our planning perspective, because it's important to how we consider planning applications or how the planning committee considers them. And often single line of "we have no objection" isn't particularly helpful, that perhaps there's something more meaningful we can ask them, and it might need a lobbying email up the tree to national office, national government, that they impose that there must be something more comprehensive sent back. Because we put a lot of stead by what they say, and simply, oh, in principle it's possible, isn't particularly helpful for us whatsoever, because everything in principle is possible if you have the plant and machinery to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. I think we can certainly take that point in action and perhaps bring a paper. Councillor Ingham?
Out of interest on that, Chair, I recently had an email from my two county councillors explaining to me that in actual fact, as the planning authority, ultimately it was our decision, and that they may make observations, but if we disagreed with those and we had evidence, then we shouldn't pass the buck on to Devon County, which I found interesting after 20 years of being told exactly the opposite. So I think that's something as an authority we ought to discuss and agree with Devon County Council. So as councillors, we know exactly what sort of decisions we should be making and how to make them.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. I think we can take that point away and have a discussion and see what we can get to there. Mr. Coles, Mr. Freeman, do we have an answer about this mystery habitat of principal importance? If Councillor Hayward?
If not, could this one just be deferred and we carry on with the rest of the agenda, and we could perhaps come back to this at the tail end before we go into the afternoon session?
I think if it helps, Chair, I think we can definitely say it's not a European protected habitat or anything like that. It's not a local nature reserve. There's a small deciduous woodland on the opposite side of the road, so we think it might just be noting that and potentially a noting of a species having been observed in that location through the Devon County Ecological Centre, who keep records of things like that. But our system has fed into all sorts of databases and records that we don't have direct access into, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to quickly answer exactly what it is, but it's definitely not a nature reserve or a formally designated area. It's more an observation of a potential habitat nearby.
Are you happy that we proceed to a vote, Councillor Bailey? Okay, in which case then we have a proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Blakey, to allocate 34A. Members, those in favour, please. Okay, 6. Can we have hands nice and high, please, members? I think that's possibly my most said phrase. I see 6. Okay, those against? I see 3. And those abstaining? I see 2. Does that add up? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. In which case, the allocation at 34A goes forward. We come then to the Newton Poppleford site report, and I feel I should apologise to Councillor Burrup for writing on the spreadsheet that I sent round that this was in Sidmouth Parish. It is, of course, not in Sidmouth Parish, so apologies for that. That's my error entirely in copy-pasting there. Anything to say about Newton Poppleford, Mr. Lane, before we move through the sites?
I suppose just to say it's a service village in the emerging local plan, so it's tier 4 in assessment hierarchy, so it's got a reasonable level of services and facilities in the village to serve both the residents of the village itself and sort of surrounding smaller hamlets. So the strategy said it should accommodate sort of a limited amount of development. Obviously the site assessment work has looked at this in more detail and we'll discuss the findings as we go through them now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. In which case then we come to site. It's worth saying that all of the Newton Poppleford sites are not recommended for allocation, and I have no members of the public registered to speak on any of them. So we come then firstly to Newt 01. Do any members wish to speak? Councillor Ingham?
As no one wants to speak on any of them, can we not move on for all of them en bloc? I propose that.
Mr. Hunter, can we do that? No, we have no members of the public registered to speak on any of the sites. Councillor Ingham is asking if we can take them en bloc.
Yeah, I can risk it, I guess. Yeah. The only problem is obviously if anybody objects to one site and not any others.
Board members not registered to speak. No.
I mean, you can move them all and we can just quickly probably take about 10 seconds to say, you know.
Okay, so do any members of committee want to speak on any of the Newton Poppleford sites contrary to officer recommendation? Councillor Howe does. Councillor Howe.
I think we need to be cautious, but we're going to come back to these anyway, I'm fairly sure. But nevertheless, Newton Pop is a sizable village. Yeah, it is a village. With reasonable facilities, and we are suggesting an allocation of 0 in it. Some of these sites, I seem to think, came around last time. The last local plan. I'm not so worried about 01, that's miles out of the centre and everything else. But certainly 5 and 4 ought to be considered. But it's whether we consider it now or whether we come back at a later date. Because we're still looking for housing numbers. What does it say?
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Just 1 second, Councillor Ingham. Mr. Freeman has his finger on the button, which usually means he wants to say something.
Well, no, thank you, Chair. I was just going to pick up on Councillor Howe's point and highlight that the reason fundamentally there are no proposed allocations in Newton Poppleford is an issue in terms of link access from those sites through sustainable means through the services and facilities that are in the village. People might be aware that the junction between the Exmouth Road and the A3052 Exeter Road, at that point there is a pinch point by the junction with the Ven Ottery Road where there is no footpath and the road is quite narrow. There's a listed building at that point and it's always been considered to be a very dangerous point for pedestrians and cyclists, and therefore there are real complexities in trying to link decent access from any of the sites that have been put forward to the services and facilities that are clearly to the eastern end of the village. The one exception to that, I think, was at the working group meeting in relation to Newto 5 and potentially Newto 4. There were suggestions that a link could be created through to a footpath that runs parallel to the high street across to the new development at King Alfred Way. Whether or not access could be created through that area, we are still looking into that. We haven't got to the bottom of whether or not that's possible based on our understanding of the land ownership at this time. So it may be, if those issues can be overcome, it may be worth us revisiting particularly Newto 5 and potentially Newto 4. But in the meantime, we don't feel that there is any way of creating a safe access to those services and facilities from the sites that have been put forward. There are other reasons in the assessment as to why some of those sites have also been rejected as well. But fundamentally, that's the reason why we're in the position we are in terms of Newton Poppleford.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. As well as blindly trusting our officers' judgments, what I don't always do, Chair, as you'll remember, I would remind colleagues that over the last 30 years, Newton Poppleford has had rather a lot of development, so much so it became the biggest village in East Devon, and some would say perhaps that's generated some of the problems they've experienced in the last 12 months especially. So giving them a breather for one local plan might be a correct thing to do.
Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. So yes, I'm the Devon County Councillor for Newton Poppleford, and I completely agree with what Ed Freeman said about that junction. I'd also just flag, I'm not sure which footpath we're talking about, but if we're talking about footpath 1, then that's got quite a few issues, and if it's footpath 1 not going to provide, a miraculous access to village facilities. So I would just strike a note of caution with the investigations that are being carried on there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Howe says he can solve this now.
Well, it's quite easy. I got all the responses I wanted to get out in the open, and I'm happy to go with Ben's suggestion of move them all.
Okay, so we have a proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Howe, that we move on from all of these sites. Mr. Hunter has confirmed he's happy with that, provided that we vote on each one individually.
Yeah.
Okay. Do any further members wish to speak on any of these sites? Okay, in which case then I'll take us through a vote on all of them. Newt 01, the proposal is to move on. Those members in favour? That's unanimous. Newt 02, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? I should do a recording of this. That's unanimous. Newt 04, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Newt 05, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? That's unanimous. I've forgotten where we were. Newt 13? Newt 13, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? That's unanimous. And Newt 14, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? That is unanimous. Okay, that brings us to the end of the sites for the morning session. As an hour and 40 minutes for lunch would be quite a long time, and we do have an item on the agenda at the end that we've not said will leave until 2 p.m. That's the NPPF site selection report. The suggestion is that we take that item now, get it out the way, and then have lunch, if committee are happy. Okay, in which case then we will come to, thank you, Mr. Lane. I don't think we need the PowerPoint for the moment. So we'll come to Mr. Freeman for agenda item. I've not even got any idea which agenda item it is, but it's the last one. Agenda item 8, the NPPF consultation response. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think I brought a report in August, was it, on this initially, which sought to consider the direct and immediate impacts on local plan production. So I won't major on that, but as members are aware, this introduces various transitional arrangements that would potentially come forward in terms of how this is implemented. And we're looking to utilise those transitional arrangements to bring forward a plan with a lower housing requirement than we would otherwise need to. This report, however, focuses on the more detailed proposals within the NPPF, of which there are many. There are a total of 106 questions in this consultation, and we've proposed responses to the vast majority of them, setting aside those that relate to green belts, because we don't have any green belts in the district, or indeed anywhere near the district, to concern ourselves with those issues. Just thinking, I mean, it covers such a multitude of issues. I'm not going to try and explain or talk you through all of them. The report is there. I'm happy to take any questions or queries as we perhaps work through the chapters, or however you want to take the item, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I think before we come to questions from committee, perhaps we could minute, Wendy, on behalf of committee, our thanks to you for going through all 106 questions here and proposing a response from the authority. With that being said, questions from members. Okay, I see no questions. We come therefore to debate. Do any members wish to speak on this report? Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I've actually read every single one of the answers. It was a hard work. I can give you a list of typos, but I won't. And I think the answers were really good. So I've got no problems at all with approving our response to the NPPF changes. Thank you.
Is that a proposal, Councillor Levine?
It is a proposal.
Okay, constitutionally then, I have to come for a seconder. Councillor Ingham, is that seconding? I see a thumbs up. So we have a proposal then for the recommendations as written? Yeah. Okay, from Councillor Levine, seconded Councillor Ingham. Councillor Howe to speak.
Well, I want to raise issues with the answer to question 7. And it's a technicality. Although I agree with Mr. Freeman's response, the issue we are in now is getting from a 4-year to a 5-year housing land supply. And Mr. Freeman's response to this, although fully understandable, doesn't allow the government to give us any chance to get from 4 years to 5 years either. We're going to be 4 years one day, 5 years when this is published. And I would like to see a sort of, you know, give us 6 months at least, if not 12 months, to get from one to the other. I'm just missing a few extra words to sort of say that. And I think it would be a good idea if we did put a response in that we need a year to get from one to the other at least. And I think that'll be a struggle even then. But doing it overnight, I just can't see how it helps us, if you get my meaning. That's my comment.
Mr. Freeman?
I suppose from an officer's perspective, I am concerned that the 4-year housing land requirement that was introduced in December is actually hindering us in addressing our housing land supply issues, in the sense that, as I've reported previously to the committee, we need to bolster our housing land supply position so that we have a 5-year housing land supply position at the point of adoption of the local plan. And if we don't have that, the local plan will not be sound. I think the 4-year housing land supply position that was introduced in December sort of muddies the waters and is unclear, whereas I think when we had a clear 5-year position, everyone was clear on what that meant and where we stood, and the tilted balance and how the presumption in favour of sustainable development was applied. And I think, while I appreciate politically it might not be popular to go back into a position where the presumption in favour of sustainable development and tilted balance is applied, it would enable us, I think, more readily to address our housing land supply issues and move to a better position than the current slightly muddy waters of the 4-year housing land supply position. So that's why I haven't included that comment in there, but obviously happy to hear the views of the committee and amend accordingly if that's their wish.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, my first point was to agree with Councillor Levine. It was a long read, and it obviously helps going back over it again. So I'm happy to support the proposal. The one thing I meant to do, and unfortunately it slipped my mind at the time, is just a request for officers that under portfolios economy includes assets. It moved in May this year, and that the economic box is ticked because there's quite an amount of information within here that has an economic impact on the district. So tiny semantic point, sorry to raise it, I should have emailed beforehand, but if those changes can be made, that'd be very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Do any other members wish to speak on this item? Okay. Councillor Jess Bailey.
As an authority, do we really want to have a 5-year land supply? Wouldn't we be better off having a 4-year land supply? Because it takes the pressure off us as an authority.
I think that's kind of my point, is that I think because we've the introduction of the 4-year housing land supply position in December, and that we do currently have a 4-year housing land supply position, people feel that has taken the pressure off, whereas I think the pressure should very much be on to bolster our housing land supply position to ensure that we can move forward with a sound local plan. I appreciate, politically you want to be in a position where we feel we're best prepared to defend decisions and the tilted balance doesn't apply. But as I've reported through the committee previously and the legal advice that we've had, we all but need to apply the tilted balance in order to bolster our housing land supply position. So I think it just removes that uncertainty, that muddied waters that the December version of the NPPF created with the 4-year housing land supply. So from an officer's perspective, and as someone that's been banging the table about we need to bolster our housing land supply position, I from a professional perspective, welcome the change to remove that. But I do fully appreciate that politically application of the tilted balance and the presumption in favour is a sensitive issue and feels like a loss of control that members may not want to see. But we do need to recognise equally that we do need to bolster our housing land supply position.
Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. Since the beginning of this year, really, as Mr. Freeman said, we've had an opportunity to catch our breath on a 4-year land supply. But I'd suggest that it's not only unfortunate if we carry on like that, it would be dumb. Because if we're not careful, we'll come up to that wall and suddenly you've got to catch up with your 5-year land supply. And then you know what Ed will be saying, and don't forget the 10%. And then the wilderness dog will be putting in applications, huge applications, that we can't bat against. So I think if we can, to gradually address this issue, now, start walking, jogging, running, so that when we get to June of next year, we're in a strong position rather than a weak position, which is the danger.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Do any other members wish to speak on this item? Otherwise, we have a proposal. No? Okay, in which case I believe the proposal from Councillor Levine is the recommendations as written in the report, seconded by Councillor Ingham. So we will go to a vote then on those recommendations. All those in favour of the recommendations as written? Okay. Did we get that? Sorry, can we just have hands again? Sorry, it wasn't unanimous. It wasn't unanimous.
No, I don't think it was. It's just Jesse's not.
Councillor Howe is not voting in favour either.
No. Okay.
Okay, those against? Nobody against, and those abstaining. That's 2. There we go. Okay, in which case then, thank you members. That, I believe, brings us to the end of the morning session about 45 minutes early. Which is an incredible feat. So thank you very much, members, for your patience. We will now break until 2 o'clock and lunch will be in the Arty room. Very good. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Absolutely not yet. No, probably not yet.
Is lunch ready now? Oh, there we go. Lunch is ready now, members. Very good.